markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom, and the rest of the world wants to see, is there any way they can make a deal? They've taken advantage of us for many, many years. For many years, we've been at the wrong side of the ball, and I'll tell you what, I think it's going to be unbelievable. The thing that people have to talk about, we're up almost to $7 trillion of investment coming into our country, and you'll see how it's going to turn out. Our country's going to boom.
Donald Trump's North American tariff trade war has gone global, overtaking this country's federal election campaign once again, this time in week 2, and throwing the markets into a significant tailspin. Here to unpack the consequences of all of that is our front bench. With me this evening, former Liberal BC Premier Christy Clark. She's now a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Tony Clement served in senior roles in Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper's cabinet. He's now the CEO of Tony Clement International. And former NDP MP and BC Minister Nathan Cullen is with us. He's now a senior advisor at Strategy Corp. Hi, everybody. It's very nice to see you. Nathan, I'll start with you. I just found that those comments from Air Force One, so interesting, only insofar as literally the worst day since COVID in the markets. And I think, there would have been a general assumption that if the markets were that bad, that would be a thing to get through to Donald Trump. And it appears to not be doing that at all. Like, where does that leave us, I guess?
Well, that assumption was made because that seemed to have some effect on Mr. Trump in his first term as president, that if the markets tank like they are right now, billions and billions of dollars, primarily of people's savings, are being shed off the market exclusively because of his actions. That would have toned him down a little bit in the first run. That doesn't seem to be working this time. He's talking about this being an operation. Well, we can add one more complaint against Mr. Trump, which is he's performing malpractice, because he's hurting Americans. U.S. Republican senators are now starting a little bit to push back, governors, et cetera, because this is what it is. It's a tax on American people at a time when we've gone collectively through years of high inflation, and the cost of living will only be driven up from everything from cars to food to the cost of rebuilding those homes in Los Angeles. And again, all of this in attacking one of the U.S.'s longest, if not the best trading partner they've ever had, is incoherent. It's not an operation. This is not good for America, and it's certainly terrible for Canada and the global trading partners that we've made.
Christy, when we were together a week ago, it was when Donald Trump signed the executive order for the auto tariffs specifically. And at the time, Mark Carney, acting in his capacity as prime minister, just said that we would wait till they were imposed, before imposing our own counter tariffs. The decision that they took today, the federal government, was to impose tariffs on autos coming in, but not on auto parts. So not completely dollar for dollar. Do you think that was the right calibration?
I think that it's important that we think about a nuanced response to the tariffs. I think that kind of a blanket tariff for tariff, whether or not it hurts Canada, is a terrible idea. So I think it's great that I think all the parties are considering this with some care, because a tariff is a tax on the people who buy those goods. So America's, the price of eggs in the United States have gone up, and lots of other costs of basic foodstuffs have gone up. We talk about that and we say we're counting on that to be part of the reason President Trump is going to show some restraint and perhaps start to walk away from this crazy plan. Well, why should we do the same thing to Canadians? If they're already going to be adding to the cost of some goods in Canada, a retaliatory tariff for tariff response means everything else, we're also going to decide to make everything more expensive for Canadians. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's some areas where you certainly want to do it, but I think it needs to be done with care, and we need to be remembering that Canadians are already bearing the brunt of a lot of stupid decisions from President Trump. We don't want a lot of dumb decisions from Canadian politicians to add to that burden.
Tony, I know that when we're talking about politics, especially in a campaign, we often talk about the differences between the political leaders. It seems like there's, again, a bit of convergence between what Mark Carney is saying and what Pierre Poilievre is saying, albeit in different ways, but about what the end state of this looks like, a renegotiation, essentially, of the free trade agreement that governs the relationship between our two countries. Both have said now that that is basically, if they were to become prime minister, what would happen on day one. I do take, however, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh's point that might be problematic, given like how can you enter into good faith negotiations with someone who treated the deal that exists at the moment so nefariously and with such little regard. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I know, and let me respond to the clip you had of the president saying everything's going to boom, or I think it's gone kaboom right now. The bomb has gone off markets and the international response. So he's gonna have to grapple with that. But in terms of the immediate responses of the leader of the opposition and the prime minister of the country, yeah, I think in terms of the immediate response, in terms of countermeasures, there's not a lot of daylight between them. However, I think what you're going to see is some differences in how to respond in the long term. We all want sovereignty. We all want our country to be sovereign, making the decisions that have to be made for the future of our country and for Canadians. But how you get there, I do believe there are divergences of that, and you'll see that in the upcoming couple of weeks leading to the leaders' debate that is going to be most important.
So let's talk about that for a moment, because last week we had talked as well, Nathan, about like the impact overall of this on the campaign and the various positioning. Has that evolved in your mind at all over the last week? Like, do you see it? I mean, we kept saying pivot. Like, what is your take on, has there been a pivot? Is there a pivot? How are they positioning themselves?
Well, they've got, as Christy talked about, they've got to speak to Canadians' concerns and also hopes. Elections are ideally about a hopeful position, things that Canadians want, and that politicians and leaders are reflecting those hopes in the platform and the promises that get made. So we can't. I know a lot of this election has been about the orange man to the south, but it can't entirely be about that. And I was glad to see the NDP out talking about housing, taking the GST off of cars and home heating and certain things that are going to affect Canadian in their pocketbooks. That's where people are going to see the impacts. Of course, there's the fear. What do we do with laid off auto workers? What do we do when the impacts of Mr. Trump's so-called operation start affecting us in significant ways? And leaders have to have a response to that. The NDP is in a good position in the sense of a long, long history of standing up for workers and protecting people when they're in trouble, making sure that healthcare is there and all the things that we need. I'm still curious to see if this can last the final 3 weeks of the campaign. Can this remain the only central issue? I know Mr. Poilievre and some of the Conservatives wanted Mr. Trump to stand down so that their guy, Mr. Poilievre, had a shot in this election. That's not going to happen. Mr. Trump's got his own nefarious ways about doing things, and he's going to continue on. And that may remain the central question for all the leaders going into the debate and then actually on polling day as well.
Christy, I just have a few minutes. I want to get both you and Tony on this round as well. Is it your view that it would remain as dominant an issue as it is right now for the next 3 weeks?
I think probably will be continue to be the central issue, but I agree with Nathan. I think other issues are going to come up, because this idea that we can not talk about housing, we cannot talk about Bill C-69, we cannot talk about resource development and how we're going to grow our foreign markets. I think we've got to talk about those things because they're pretty important for growing the economy. But can I just say this quickly? My view of debates is this. I think that they're vastly overrated for the audio and vastly underrated for the video. Because if you, one of the people closest to me in my life always says, what Canadians really do is we turn off the sound and we just actually see what's happening. And if this is a battle of how the leaders look and behave on the stage, I think Mark Carney's outcome is going to be pretty good, regardless of what's said. He presents as a leader.
Last word to you, Tony, on that.
Yeah, no, I actually, what I've been doing is talking to voters. I've been in 6 GTA ridings in the last 7 days, knocking on doors. And I think your point is absolutely right, Vashi, that there is a big issue, but it's bigger than Trump and tariffs. It's more like economic uncertainty writ large, and that's cost of living, cost of housing. Is my neighborhood still safe? All of these issues are coming up at the door. Yes, Trump tariffs are part of that mix too, but people are starting to look at the broader picture because this is such a consequential election. So for me, all bets are off. You know, we've got 3.5 weeks to go, a lot of time to persuade a lot of people, particularly in the 905 of the GTA, that things have got to change for the better. So we're going to have a wild ride, that's for sure.